Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast. Let's get right into it. So first we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders appoints man who had sex with a minor to top state post. She claims LGBTQ plus rights need to be restricted to protect kids, but she appointed a man who bid having sex with a minor to a high-level position from LGBTQNation.com by International Silver One. And yeah, I like what BHKMB says here. Just go show that no matter how sick or perverted you are, you can still find a role as a leader in government, and yet people still think government is a good thing. I agree with that. You got tons of people on all sides of the political spectrum who are, not the most morally upstanding characters, but yet they still somehow manage to find a role in government, and that's why I think, government is an inherently bad thing, I would say, and because, ultimately, it's just pushing people around and telling them what to do, and I don't think that's being a libertarian, I would say. Libertarians let other people do what they want to, and as long as they're not hurting anyone else. Then we have book banner humiliated at Florida school board meeting. She fled without saying a word from LGBTQNation.com by International Silver One. And I personally, don't think we should be restricting books, but ultimately I do think when it comes to public schools and private schools, I do think the parents should have a role in which books are in the curriculum and in the library, and I think that's important. And I think that's why I don't really consider them book banners, but ultimately if you want to consider them book banners, I guess you should be able to. Ultimately I think the U.S. government, they've been kind of book banning. As they recently released the Amazon files that said they might have pressured Amazon to censor books that dissented from the official government narrative, and I don't think that's libertarian, I would say. Then we have special counsel alleged Biden couldn't recall personal milestones. His response, "My memory is fine," from APnews.com. From by Narco Federation, they added, "LOL, we're so fucked, sigh." And I would agree with that. The president's ultimately just a figurehead, and I think Biden, everyone except for the hardcore partisans knows that he's not all there, and he's kind of just brain dead. And, I just want to show you the president really doesn't matter, I would say. It's just a figurehead. And the real power lies with the administrative state, I would say. Then we have r/Libertarian Uncensored discusses and grades U.S. Vice Presidents, number 38, Hubert H. Humphrey. And I said Lyndon B. Johnson's VP and a senator from Minnesota before and after his time as VP. Apparently he was much more mute figure as VP than he was in the Senate. As pretty much all VPs are, I would say. Tom Lehrer, still alive today at 95, even wrote a song about it called Whatever Became of Hubert. After his term as VP, he was the Democratic nominee for the 1968 post-election, but lost narrowly to former VP Richard Nixon. Final grade C-, and that's my thoughts on him. The next we have Florida man bludgeons father to death after learning he got the vaccine. Investigators from the nationaldesk.com by Kage blah blah blah. And I said, you see people being radicalized to violence all over the political spectrum. This suburb only cares when they're in the outgroup. That's my thoughts there. If this guy was a pro-vaccine person beating up people and beheading and beating their father to death, the subreddit wouldn't care. So that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have tinfoil hat time. How are they going to spice up the 2024 U.S. post election? And by they, I mean the people who really run the country, like the CIA and co., not people who they say run the country, like the president. I said, for an election year, it has been rather boring so far, in my opinion. My fear is that they will try and have Biden assassinated so they can replace him with someone else, and also use it to push an agenda of MAGA extremism in order to drive voter turnout. And I also added, Joe Biden is clearly not all there, and therefore I think they might see him as expendable. I guess we will have to wait and see. I said I don't think the CIA will directly assassinate the president, but I think they might have someone on their radar shoot him like they did for JFK, and that's something that I think, we might see happen soon. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see for sure. Then we have Stefanik says she would not have done with what Mike Pence did on January 6th from thehill.com by Kage blah blah. And they added next time they'll make sure there is no one to stop their coup. And ultimately, I personally don't really care for elections, but ultimately, it does come to who can control the narrative. And in regards to January 6th, increasingly, you can't control the narrative regarding that. I think it's probably mostly a false flag. But that being said, ultimately, all power does come down to physical force. And that's why, I think the Capitol stormings might be the new norm after every presidential election now, but I guess we'll have to wait and see to be sure. Then we have Let's Talk About What's Being Missed in Tucker versus Putin from Bo the Fifth Column on YouTube by Anarcho Federation, and they said, what's not being discussed is how Putin is not the conservative figure for the American right in Carlson's base UMass. He's not a Christian. He's not a traditional ideologue. He's not even sort of Western right wing supporting his position. He's all about power, like every other astute tyrant. He knows religion is a tool for control, an opiate of the masses, as Marx called it. He doesn't care about your gods. He'll use it to keep the masses in check. What Putin wants from the American right is to sow division. And I guess I would agree with that. Putin has an agenda, but the thing is, everyone has an agenda, but people only care when it's members of the out group have an agenda, not when members of the in group do. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have 13 sentenced to death for homosexuality in Yemen. A reminder that the Houthis are reactionaries. As a reminder, condemning the Houthis killing LGBTQIA plus people is not endorsement of the state of Israel at all. And that's from today, LorientLijor.com. And that's the cross post from the Unite Against the Rights subreddit by International Silver One. And I guess, I think the big problem is, I don't think people should be killing people for doing stuff consensually like homosexuality. But that being said, ultimately I don't think it's the U.S.'s job to keep bombing Yemen either, and I don't think that's helping when it comes to stuff like this. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have r/Libertarian Censored discusses and grades the U.S. Vice President's number 39, Spiro Agnew, and I said, Richard Nixon's first VP and the governor of Maryland at the time of his election looks like he pretty much did nothing but grandstanding speeches as VP. He cast 2 tie-breaking votes as President of the Senate, one of which led to the creation of the Safe Pro program and the other which led to the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Agnew was the first VP since Calhoun to resign in the office, which he did after being charged with tax evasion. Quite a libertarian way to leave office. Agnew was also the first VP to have an interim replacement under the 25th Amendment, which was passed in 1964. Previously, there was no replace of VP, so that the office would remain vacant until the next post-election. The VP died, resigned, or ascended to the presidency. Was replaced as VP by Gerald Ford, the House Minority Leader from Michigan, who then went on to ascend to the presidency himself after Nixon resigned. Had Ford not been confirmed in time, Carl Albert, Speaker of the House from Oklahoma, would have been acting president. And final grade C-, and that's my thoughts on him. And I said, fun fact, in 1972, U.S. post-election is the only one so far where the elected president or VP makes the end of the term. And you could never tell that by just looking at the maps, I would say. Then we have Florida bill would eliminate all property taxes from WFLA.com. And I said, get rid of all non-voluntary taxes. And that's my thoughts on that issue. I think if people want to pay taxes, I think they should be able to. I think they should be forced to pay taxes. Then we have Cis, quote-unquote, tomboy athlete requires police protection after GOP official implies she's transgender from LGBTQNation.com. And I didn't comment on that one, but, ultimately, I think, if I don't think people should be, doing all the jail inspections, but ultimately, I do think, if they are transgender, ultimately, I don't think it's fair for them to compete in sports. But if that being said, ultimately, it does. I think you should reject what they were assigned at birth as, and if they are, MTF, and they do ban transgender participation in sports, ultimately that's their thing, and ultimately, it does come to who has the power, the economic and social capital and force to do what. So that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Luna to file Schumer Act requiring members of Congress fight in wars they advocate for, from Florida's Voice, and I posted that, and I said, I don't agree with Luna on everything, but this is a great idea. We realize that Congress advocates for war in large part because they aren't the ones fighting in it. And, I support this idea of hers, but by her logic, she should probably be on the IDF front line since she supports Israel's war against Palestine. So that's my thought on that issue. Ultimately, I do think if you're going to serve in Congress and you're going to push for war, you should be required to fight in it if you're going to push for it that much. Because, you're never going to be the ones dying in war. It's the people you send to war that are going to die in war, not you. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have why it's impossible to agree on what's allowed, and from danlu.com by Frosty Slawman. That's looks like a pretty long post, and yeah, ultimately, it does come down to who can, what people agree to understand as what definitions. I would say as libertarian, forcing definitions on people isn't libertarian. So ultimately, it does come down to who defines what is what, and who agrees to do what, and who justifies what actions. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have progressives in Congress spoke up for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now they're breaking fundraising records from APnews.com by International Silver One. And I said, it's from APnews.com. I think I said it's from News, but yeah. And ultimately, I do think the Gaza stuff isn't popular among the American people, and people increasingly just don't want their money thrown at other countries. So that's my thoughts there. That's why and if progressives want to support that, I think they should be able to. Then we have, I endorse the Stop Politicians Profiting from War Act by Rashida Tlaib, and that's a tweet from Jewish Voice for Peace Action. We are proud to endorse this legislation led by Rashida. It's time to stop allowing politicians to profit from war. And I would agree with that. The thing is, we should stop politicians profiting from war and all their investments in the military-industrial complex. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. I think they push for war so much because they have investments in things like Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or Halliburton, and that's why I think we just got to hold them accountable for that. So that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Karl Marx rising from the grave, finding out we have been taken over by fat, ugly, mentally ill losers who think being healthy is fascism, from Shoe on Head on Twitter. And that's not the end of the tweet, that's all I can fit in there, but they also think who thinking and can't even own guns because they will kill themselves. And she quote tweeted a tweet from Christopher at Halal Ocalism, and they say leftists should work out a tweet Odyssey, and it's a video of how this one guy Kieran says, leftists should work out because they need to be healthy and fit if we want to defeat the fascists, and all the comments are like, no, you can't do that. That's being against the disabled and all that other stuff. And I said, sometimes I think these people are just like this on social media, and then I see that, no, they're like that in real life as well. And I linked to the DSA National Convention 2019 highlights on YouTube. And I also said, so also more recently as well, I linked to a tweet from Noah Smith who said, it's time for us to recognize that there is no possibility of a leftist revolution in America. It's a tweet from Meet the Zionist. Okay, now I'm looking for a new therapist because this woman literally said her biggest therapeutic goal for me is to get me to take off my mask. She asked me what that would take, and I said it would not take COVID not being a risk anymore. I'm barely surviving. I cannot risk long COVID. And yeah, that just goes to show you that when people get so into their circle jerk, that they will be again. They'll think that everything that sense at all is fascism, and that's what you see when in regards to the Twitter Reddit left, I would say. Then we have r/Libertarian Uncensored discusses and grades the U.S. Vice President's number 41, Nelson Rockefeller. And I said, Gerald Ford's VP and the former governor of New York, Rockefeller was known to be a liberal Republican, a species that would soon start to die out in the wake of the upcoming Reagan Revolution. His vice presidency was relatively uneventful, and he was replaced as VP before his 1976 POTUS bid by Bob Dole, a senator from Kansas. Had he stayed on as VP with Ford winning the election, he would have died in office in 1979. Speaking of his death, it's long been rumored that his heart attack the heart attack he had was brought on by the 70-year-old Rockefeller having sex with his 25-year-old secretary, Megan Marshak. New York Magazine famously quipped, Nelson thought he was coming, but he was going. Final grade C. And that's my thoughts on him. Then we have, The New Meritocracy is a Nightmare from ItHadToBeSaid.com by Whittling Dan. That's a cross-version libertarian socialism subreddit, and that's a YouTube video from It Had to Be Said. And, yeah, I definitely do think, increasingly the meritocracy isn't good. With that being said, if people want to have a collective meritocracy, I think they should be able to. But if you want to leave and form your own group instead, I think you should be able to as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have how U.S. companies getting away with funding Russia's military for National Silver One. That's a YouTube video from Johnny Harris. And yeah, that's definitely not good. But ultimately, if they want to fund Russia's military, I think they should be able to. And if people don't like that, then don't patronize, don't give them your patronage. Or if you think it's a NAP violation, I think you're free to use force against them. That's my thoughts on that. If you want to just start using force against them, I think you should be able to. Then we have, can China save its deflating economy from the socialtalks.com by aftermatch 1716? And I would say hopefully they could, but I personally don't care for the Chinese government, and hopefully this deflating economy will be a way to take out the Chinese government, replace them with a more libertarian government. So that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in this episode. Bye.